Lara, what do you look for? How do you make judgments about whether something is a good strategy for a startup or not a good strategy?
That's our selection process in a nutshell. So we have an open selection process. Anyone from anywhere who has an idea can apply, who's over the age of 18. We funded our youngest fellow this year, who's 20. That was very exciting. So we have a bunch of questions. They're short. There's a character limit on purpose. You have to keep very tight, and it leads you through a strategy. So if you haven't thought about it before, have you guys seen the application? Yeah. Well, imagine just answering in 100 characters or whatever. It's very challenging, but it leads people through the important pieces. And is that phase 1 or phase 2? Because phase 2, we have the onion. Does that ring any bells? No? Okay. So we added something this year. We used to ask, what's your theory of change, right? And we got the worst answers. I mean, really, people just, it was too academic, it was esoteric, and just people didn't get it. So, but we think, obviously, it's very important, and by our definition, it's based on the change that you want to see, why rationalize or explain or connect the dots between why you are doing what you're going to do and when and how you prioritize it. So that's the theory of change. And so especially in our application process is completely open, so people from all sorts of different countries apply. It didn't translate well, even though we explained it to the best of our ability. So we created a new thing called the onion, which is unpeeling all the different layers. And are you familiar with it? No? Okay. So the onion leads people through this exercise. Very interesting. It's more for them in a way than it is for our review of the application. But it's what are the problems, and lead us that you are addressing through your solution. Then lead us through the how, from taking that problem, lead us through the causal, the 5 whys, and of between the problem and your solution, and connect those lines kind of in a few different axes. It's confusing to explain, but the thinking that goes into this document then can translate very well in our application process, and you can really tell when there's clear thinking or when there's kind of trying to fit things together to rationalize the why you're doing what you're doing. So that has been one thing that's really important, and I want to emphasize clear thinking. That a strategy is really about being really clear, and that process, as you were saying, Danielle, takes a really, really long time because it involves a lot of homework, a lot of talking, a lot of putting holes in your ideas, and charging through even when people disagree with you, if that's what it takes. But that's the most important thing. You can tell when something's kind of raw, but we find that our fellows who are kind of really tied to a certain strategy, it's because they have been owning it, changing it, massaging it, molding it for a really long period of time. And also strategic trade-offs, you talked about that a little bit, and I think that's also really important. That's a core piece of strategy. We see people who want to do everything a lot, and, well, not a good idea. And so I like it when I see people recognize that they are not going to do something, and here's why. It's almost just as important as the decision to say why you are doing something. So that's another piece. The last thing I'll say about strategy is, and Echo Ingredients going through a strategic planning process too, so this is relevant for us. I have found that the most important thing about a strategy is figuring out what questions, just in general, what are the questions that you need to answer. Oftentimes people don't think about that from that perspective, and so therefore kind of implicitly they're asking the wrong questions, and then they're led down this really crazy path that doesn't deliver the answers. And we've seen that in our fellows. And so I think a really great discipline process, as you were talking about, the strategic planning process, 5-year plan, is figuring out what are the absolutely right questions we need to ask ourselves in this process, and then kind of charging